Sahara's. What was called Sahara's? This one. And they go down.
Sorry.
No. This way. You know where the new restaurant is?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I could throw it those things. And on the corner of that strip shopping center, right there. So I was wondering if it was the same owner and maybe because it said Mediterranean food like that. Who would build another restaurant and have Mediterranean food right next to it? So it could have been a deal with the same owners, and when they opened the new one,
I don't know.
I think that's what happened. Have you been there? The new one?
The new one's very good. It was the chef from Sarah's. Serving.
Okay.
He just opened his own, not just, but I mean, he left there and opened his own restaurant. And it's quite good.
Yeah. And it's kind of cool. It's got a lot of glass there. So when you drive by at night, it's crowded. It's every night. It's like, you see it from the space.
Single serving will serve.
What's up, Frank? How are you tonight? I'm good.
Good evening, everyone. And welcome to the February 27th City of Bel Air Beach City Council Work Session. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Renee, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Frank Bankert.
Present.
Councilmember Lloyd Roberts.
Here.
Councilmember Kim Shaw Elliott.
Present.
Mayor Dave Gaddis.
Here.
City Manager Kyle Reefler.
Here.
And City Attorney Randy Mora.
Present.
Thank you, Renee. All right, we'll get right to it. This is the City of Bel Air Beach Municipal Code Review, and I'm going to pass the agenda over to City Manager Reefler.
Thank you, Mayor. We have our consultant here tonight, Louis Serna, and he's going to get us started. We have 4 chapters to review tonight, and we're starting with chapter 10.
Good evening, everyone. Glad to see you again. We'll try to keep this light as possible, given the subject matter, but hopefully you'll enjoy it and have some comments. There we go. So these are the 4 chapters we'll be looking at tonight. Chapter 10, 22, 30, and 50. Been working with the manager on dividing up the other sections of the code. Tonight's, given our experience in writing and implementing code, and also with issuing permits, we're probably not as familiar with these sections of the code.
Sorry about that.
As others, but we're going to rely on a lot of your comments for these sections. We did go through, we did check and make sure cross references were correct, and made sure state references were correct. We did read it to also make sure that it made sense, that we were able to understand it. So what I'd like to do is really just walk through the sections. We're not going to go line by line because that would take all night, but go by article in the sections and find out if anybody's had any comments, and I can give you the comments that we have. The first article that we're looking at is this is chapter 10, building and building regulations. It includes the sections on the screen in front of you. We noted section 10.3, the coastal construction control line. That might be a section to move into what's called the land development code, or at least cross-reference it, because that's something that is commonly referenced or commonly looked at when you're developing. Are there any comments on these sections or anything you'd like to discuss?
Just one question, what you provided us is the exact same thing in the Muni code right now, right? There is no changes, because I was looking for red lines. and
No,
I'm thinking, and I didn't want to dissect it, but I'm thinking, what are we doing? Just revisiting the code, right?
Thank you. I had the same comment.
Yeah.
So this is existing code?
This is existing code, yes, yeah, we will provide strike through and underline. Really what we want to do is find out if you had any comments that we could address, based on your experiences, and you'll see as we go through, but we have not provided any red lines or anything. I'm just going to read to you, like I said, with section 10.3, our recommendation is to move that or cross-reference it in the land development code.
Mr. Roberts.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think it might be helpful to all of us. I went through it, but if during the meetings that you had with Kyle,
Mhm.
if you guys identified some things that you thought needed to be looked at more closely, and Randy as well with his experience from a legal perspective, if we can discuss those specific things for sure. And then anything else that we may have as a group found and had a question about, add that to it. But I think a good start would be the items and areas that you guys identified and Kyle's experience with, hey, I've had some issues with this particular area with citizens or whatever the case may be. And possibly we need to address that, change the language, add to, subtract, whatever.
And we did, and that's sort of what we were planning. I did identify those sections that Kyle and I discussed and things that we discussed. I wasn't sure if you all had anything in addition based on comments with the public or experience. So yeah, what I'll do is I'll just walk through these sections quickly, and I'll point out the sections that we found things on. And Kyle, if I missed anything through these sections, let me know. And like I said, I think we're going to get more into that when we get into the other sections of the code, the land development code, especially zoning and things like that, and signs and things like that. But these sections, probably not as much as the others.
Before you get started with that, Councilmember Elliott, did you have something?
Oh, a similar feedback. I was wondering what might I be able to research, as I'm new to the council, so what might I be able to research to identify where there have been issues that were points of discussion from the citizens? Like how can I find where the rub points were?
We provided the list of variances we've had in the past couple of years. Since we're on chapter 10, one of the biggest ones that we kept having over and over again is the height of a swimming pool. So that's a definite one that I'd like to hit. And I'm sure we could get comments too from the Board of Adjustment members.
Okay,
on
good.
that.
All right, but as of yet, we do not have a compiled list that has been brought to your attention through either planning and zoning or the Board of Adjustments, anything like that.
No,
Okay, so the council is starting with a blank slate.
yes,
Okay. All right.
Yeah, and if it helps, we're going to prepare an analysis of the code and issues that we've identified based on our experience. But at this point, we're just trying to find out issues that we're not familiar with based on your experience.
Okay.
So yeah, I'll go quickly through these and stop it unless you have anything, or I can identify where we found comments. But really, these are just the sections that we've identified, and nothing in these sections here under Article 2 building code so far.
So I did have a question about building code. It's been, I've actually had two people, they're both developers, question the two-story rule in a 35-foot building. I thought it was best to bring it up because I'm going to lay out a scenario that's happening. You are allowed to build two stories. Either one story is next to your garage and the other story is above your garage. The other scenario is you build a garage and then you can build two stories above your garage. Well, I think what seems to be happening is people are building a garage or two garages, and then there's non-livable space down below, and then they build their allowed two stories. Eventually, they fill in that non-livable space. And I don't, I'm not really sure why the rule is the way that it is, but I'm coming to the council to find out if this is something we should even consider looking at, or if there was a reason for this, why this rule is in place. I understand if you're below base flood elevation, that would be a problem. But if your first story that's adjacent to the garage is above base flood elevation, and you could successfully build 3 stories in the same 35-foot box, what's the purpose of doing that? And why would we not want to have taxable living space?
Well, under the NFIP, if you try to convert the bottom floor, they'll drop your policy and they could infringe penalties on the whole township.
I understand that,
Yeah,
but they
but-
still build in anyway.
Yeah, I understand that, but I mean, if you ask anybody about it, they're gonna tell you, no, we didn't build it. You know what I'm saying? It's gonna be a lot of like
Right.
smoke and mirrors, you know?
Well, that's my
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
We know that the majority of homeowners are eventually going to do something with that property. And so my question is if they can successfully build a first floor next to their garage below the second and third story, what would prevent us from stopping them from doing that?
Well, if you don't have a mortgage on your property, nothing.
No, I'm just talking about new builds.
Yeah,
Anyone on the board out there? Any comments on that?
Just see it violated all over the city. Because they're all going to live right, just like you said. They're doing it.
yeah, but the thing is, if you don't have a mortgage and you still have to follow our building codes, absolutely, but like the mayor says, they do then migrate downstairs and make it in a total living space. Now, if you get washed out, you get washed out. But I don't think that's your concern. Your concern is you want to be able to tax.
I would say that if they're able to build anything above base flood elevation, yet not go higher than 35 feet that our code restricts builders to, why would we not want to have more living space in that home that's not taking up any more space for setbacks or height or anything else? And then you've got more taxable revenue coming in on that home.
What's the highest base elevation here?
Base flood elevation on the maps currently,
Yeah.
10.
Is it actually 10 feet?
Yeah, used to be higher, but it's 10.
Yeah,
Oh, right on the intercoastal.
so that would be above the.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking the
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, then we-
Yes, you guys, either one.
How many square feet, I don't. Require three car garage. All right, now, go over that. 4 cars. If you had 25 or more, you're gonna have 3 cars. Yeah. That. It's not in the code, is it, Kyle?
No.
It's not supported above 25.
Now, I will say that changing a rule like this would make possible for a house that was recently turned down by the Board of Adjustments, because it's absolutely, you're not allowed to get a variance on that particular type of build. So there are certain homes that may be waiting in the wings to have this done, and that may be why a developer has approached me on this, but I still don't understand why the rule is there. Yes, sir. I tell you what, can you stand up? Can't hear you very well. I don't really know. I don't have the answer to
It's
that.
no,
So what is the
We
process
couldn't
right
approve
now,
those.
Kyle? So if I have a vacant lot, and I'm gonna build and I've got plans and specs to that. Do I have to get the city's approval first before it goes to the county?
yes.
So they give it to you guys and somebody within our organization or somebody who we outsource to?
So if it's a new build, our city engineer will review it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, so he reviews it based on our codes.
Yes.
So he would know all of that, the 35
Oh,
foot
yeah.
height and all that kind of stuff. Okay.
In the 10-foot elevation minimum for FEMA, right?
Well, it depends on where you're at.
Well, yeah, just
You gotta-
5 feet, then you have to go 5 feet up. above it.
Yes, so you got the base foot elevation, whatever the map says currently, and then you have a foot of freeboard adopted from the state.
Then do we contact the county or does the owner take all that information once we've checked the boxes and said we're good? Then he or she
Once
takes that.
we review it, we stamp it, and then they take it to the county and put it in their portal.
Got it.
Does anyone see any drawbacks,
Yeah.
downfalls of changing this rule? Or does anyone see any advantages to it? I'd like to know what everyone thinks.
Well, are we restricting people from building and using their land and could we get hit with an inverse condemnation suit? You know, the Fifth Amendment property. You know,
Good question.
I'm going through it right now, but I'm saying. Property owners have a lot of rights with their land, you
Right.
know? And that's why you have variance hearings today.
Excellent question, Member Bankert. The question posed was, do we run the risk of facing some kind of inverse condemnation claim as we restrict the land development code? I will tell you first that as we endeavor on this process, it's worth noting right now, before we begin, that this is a process, first and foremost. And one of the limitations on this process that you may recall was during the 2023 legislative or 2022 legislative session. I'm trying to remember the date, sorry. 2023 legislative session, a bill was adopted that restricted restricted local governments from regulating land development in a way that was more burdensome or restrictive within 100 miles of landfall from where Hurricane Ian and another hurricane that hit the East Coast hit. We cannot presently adopt any restriction, any land development regulation that is more burdensome or restrictive. That has a sunset provision in October of this year. So part of this is working up work product that may not be adopted until after October. So I first want to say that as a good entree to what to expect as we endeavor on this process. I will be working with, that's one thing we will have to be mindful of. We will have to consider whether particular restrictions, depending on what you adopt, if they are consistent with your comprehensive plan. If they are already memorialized in your comprehensive plan, for example, then we face less legal liability as a claim that somebody could not have reasonably expected that to be regulated as it is already regulated, for example. An inverse condemnation claim is interesting because it's the claim is that you fully devalued my use.
Yes.
Which is a harder showing to make. I think the more challenging statutory scheme that we will have to be mindful of is found in Florida statute section 70.001, which is the Byrd-Harris Act. We've talked about around it in the past. The Byrd-Harris Act is a unique creature of Florida statutory law, different from inverse condemnation, where you say you have not done a complete taking, but by your government regulation, by your action, you have diminished my reasonable investment-backed expectation for the use of my property. That is a very fact and legal intensive analysis that will have to be taken on a case-by-case basis. Anytime we adopt anything that's more restrictive or burdensome, you face the possibility of legal claims that somebody says, wait a second, part of that's going to come into where were they in that process? If you had pie in the sky ideas of building a castle at your property, but you've never hired an architect, you've never submitted a plan, you've never manifested any real intention, it's a lot harder for you to claim that than, hey, I was halfway through the development process. You know, the most successful Byrd-Harris Act case, for example, involved a concrete batch plant where they were planning to get a concrete batch plant. They were halfway through the process, and then the commission said, you know what? No concrete patch points. So that sort of thing is obviously easier to perfect. But I will tell you, I want to get ahead of this question because I think it's a salient question that's going to be a through line through a lot of this discourse. I'm never going to be in a position to tell you we can adopt this without an inverse condemnation claim or a Burt Harris claim, because nothing's an issue until somebody makes it an issue. And then we'll have to take it up on the merits of that. But anytime you restrict people's land use rights, you face the possibility of a legal claim, and then it just gets down to what are the merits of those claims.
No, and I'm glad the mayor brought this up about living spaces and all like that, because I think you could get jackpotted, like you said, with the city, then the city could get sued personally, right? If we restricted their,
Well, the suit would not lie against the commissioners. The suit, any suit for regulation would lie against the commission, would lie against the city generally. But again, we would have to look at what expectation did they have that this would not be regulated? And if you're regulating in a way that is consistent, for example, you change your code in a manner that is consistent with the way it's always been administered, but we never really changed the code. We clarified it. And this is consistent with a demonstrable history of enforcing and administering it in this way, then maybe you have a better argument than you used to be able to build 2 floors and now we say you can't build higher than 15 feet, for example. That's a lot more explicit.
and I didn't know we had a base flood elevation in certain parts of this area of 10 feet. And I just didn't,
And
I thought Florida was.
the one other part that we're seeing in a lot of coastal communities, and you're seeing this through short-term rental and other legal concerns, when we talk about base flood elevation regulations and FEMA restrictions, those are federal restrictions. We don't have the ability to just ignore those. The challenge becomes for local government, what is your point of entry to learn about, investigate, and prove that there is in fact a violation? One of the reasons you hear that discourse a lot more in short-term rental restrictions and systems is because those regimes give in local governments an opportunity to inspect properties, get in people's garages and the like. But if somebody keeps their garage closed all the time and we suspect maybe there's bunk beds or something there, but we never really know, and all the neighbors say, well, everybody knows it, but the city doesn't really have a point of entry to establish it. And that's where some of that disconnect comes between the community awareness versus the local government's regulation or enforcement of it. So it is important to note that disconnect between the alleged collective consciousness versus what do we have actual records to prove? Because unless somebody, for example, submits to permitting, Kyle's staff doesn't know, what I did in my house unless I invite them in somehow. So how is Kyle's staff to enforce if I never let anybody in and turn 1 bedroom into 3? So those are the sort of challenges we face on the administration of that enforcement.
Okay, all right.
I know it's a tangent, but I think those are important legal concepts that we need to address now before we do a whole LDC overview.
Thank you, Randy.
And I think, Dave, what you were suggesting doesn't sound like anything that's being more restrictive.
No, it would be less restrictive.
5 feet, right? And effectively, if I understand it correctly, would just say we would have 3 stories. It doesn't matter if the first story is a garage or a bedroom.
It would
Just
be
35 feet.
3 stories and more revenue.
Right, because the square footage of living space would be more.
And from the outside, I've seen 2 identical homes. One is living space, one is not living space. But if you look at the pictures on the outside, it's exactly the same building. The only difference is that they finished the inside by permit, the way that they're supposed to, and now they're being taxed for that extra square footage where they weren't with the I did it myself while no one was looking.
A lot of that.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm not sure exactly where that is. I was looking it up earlier and I haven't found it yet, but I wanted to bring that up.
So our current code, if somebody had a garage and then 2 stories above it, and then they came 3 years later and said, hey, we want to finish that garage, and they applied for a permit and a review by the city, would we okay that as our current?
We couldn't,
We couldn't.
yeah.
So how did they do that? You said they permitted the.
No. What I'm saying is in the future, if we decide as a group that we're going to move forward with this and allow the 3rd story to be story number 1,
Correct.
then they could effectively apply for a permit and finish their inside. Because I think current code requires them to have breakaway walls and all of this good stuff for flooding that doesn't even exist. because it's above base flood elevation. Is that correct?
It really depends house to house. We'd have to check if they're proposing that they have a third livable floor, we'd have to check that that is above the design flood elevation.
Right.
Mhm.
So if it was, and the only thing restricting it right now is that height code. In section 94 or chapter 94. That says either two adjacent or two above. So it's been interpreted as one or the other. If you were to change it, it would be less restrictive, but they'd still have to meet all the flood code regulations.
And that was really the only item that I had. And I thought was just, okay, maybe we should look into this. Anyone else?
Are we talking about the entire section here? The entire article, or excuse me, chapter 10? Because I have a couple. Okay.
Yeah. Please go right ahead.
Here's a little nit on section 1040. Second line at the end. It says to issue permits to reply on inspections. Is that intended to be that, to reply on inspections?
That's 40 you're at.
Oh, never mind. I'm reading it better now. That makes sense now. One issue that we probably want to be aware of, and you may have some ideas about this later, but section 1077 deals with the materials that are appropriate for off-street parking spaces. I know there's a lot of discussion as to whether shell is appropriate, is it not,
Is not.
kind of, I know it's not. Should it be, their turf block, what is that? I mean, there might be some questions there that we want to be aware of as we look at this. Let's see.
Some of those questions, and probably some of the reasons why we don't allow those types of driveways is because whenever the water rises, things tend to float and move around and go everywhere, clog the drains.
Can I jump on that, what you just said, because you were talking about bark after Dahlia.
Yes.
Is there something that's going to be put in there regarding this?
Yes, that was something else we wanted to bring up. I know that a lot of this is, we can't enable until after, is it October, Randy? Is that what you said?
Yes, presently, unless the legislature somehow extends that process during the current session, the sunset period for that moratorium, if you will, is through October 2024, 2 years from the September 28th, 2022 landfall of Ian.
Don't be
So-
surprised if they,
And they may not do it in the way that you expect. They may find some other language. So we're having, the session concludes on March 8th. So we're having to closely monitor and see what comes out. And there's a possibility, especially in the last 3 days where rules get suspended, that something may pivot. So absent some kind of legislative extension, the prohibition against land development regulations that are more restrictive or burdensome extends through October 2024.
okay. And I think that falls under lawn maintenance. So whenever we get to that section, we'll definitely bring that up. Thank you for reminding me, Mr. Bankert.
While Kim's looking through that, I just noticed a few times, or more than a few times, the terminology that was used was talking about occupied residential and non-residential buildings. So help me understand. So what non-residential buildings, by definition, do we currently deal with?
I guess just the institutional. The city hall and
It's
the
like,
public works,
okay,
that's the only non-residential.
that's what I thought. So there's anything that's on, anything else, even though they're
Is-
quote condos,
Yeah.
obviously they're residential.
Multifamily
Yeah,
or single family, yeah.
okay. And like the building across from me that says motel on it, by our definition, is not a motel, right? it is a residential.
It's residential
type of
medium,
deal.
District One residential medium.
Okay, good. So it is appropriate for us to have the terminology non-residential buildings because we do have City Hall, we have the Public Works Building. Which would qualify for that.
I would think
Okay.
so. I'm not.
Makes sense.
The only thing I got in this whole section is, and I brought this up before, is 10-2, the start time of 7 AM.
Hmm.
You don't see too many landscapers at that time, but like driving pile. You got a lot of retirees, you know. You don't have a Vulcan hammer here a lot of times, but just the monkey and the wedge, hitting it. Shakes up the neighborhood a little bit. I don't know if that would be better to move to 8 o'clock or 7:30.
I don't know why, but I know I don't have a lawn service now, but when I received the one that the person that I purchased the house from, he had one already set up, so we kept it. And they would come out and park in front of the house at 7:30, but they would never start mowing until 8. So
So you see,
I don't know if they knew.
I'm sure all of us seen a lot of them well past 6 o'clock in the summer. Cutting lawns. Just
Oh, at night you're
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
about.
because because we're supposed to shut down at 7
Right,
PM.
right.
But I think more people would like the hour moved, you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
I don't know if you're getting complaints or I just get,
We get complaints every time they're
Yeah.
driving piles, but that could be in the middle of the day.
yeah.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
I don't know. The guys that I've dealt with, since I've moved here, they won't start at 7. They'll wait till 8 just because they don't want to be obnoxious. And there's a big sign on their truck. It says who they are and you make your neighbor mad, they'll never use them. So, I don't know how much of a problem starting at 7 AM is for the community as a whole, but I don't really have a problem with it. Council?
Just seems like we got to give people some leeway in how they manage their crews and not that much of a problem, and people seem to be polite anyway. Why change?
Mr. Kelly? What time do you start? Do you make noise at 7?
Usually wait till 7:30 and we got some concrete that is going to the town. Not the town. It rained. What we said,
7:30.
set up, it's like Frank said, set up, leaders go.
See, the problem is, and you're from the construction world like I am. You get a crew, and this is what Lynn, my old neighbor, when they were doing our street net, the crew would show up at 6:30. Start drinking coffee, screaming and yelling.
First,
Yeah,
6 o'clock. The cleanhouse behind me, and the Hollywood,
yeah,
all that. It's all related to those, all this is related.
yeah, yes, absolutely.
It's not.
No, I'm gonna correct my complaint there. It was all outside, yes.
So is that something that we want to consider changing to 6 PM to 7 AM quiet time? Do we want to adjust it?
We can take an informal vote on it. Who wants to change it? Who wants to, let's say, who wants to leave it? I think I'm fine with leaving it.
It doesn't, if you're fine with the mayor, I'm fine with it. I'm just telling you what some people are asking.
I know. I think no matter what.
They're gonna
they're
ask it, like
complain.
he says, they're gonna say 11 AM, they're gonna.
You know, people managing their crews, I mean, it could be like it's excessively hot. Let's get out there early.
Absolutely.
Safety of the workers.
You know, put the roof on.
Yeah, or, we're running a little behind. Let's get this going. I think they should have that kind of flexibility. I have 2 little nits. Page 29 of 30 in subparagraph 3, the last line. Swimming pool decking and retaining walls shall not be there included in the completion of setbacks. Just missing a word.
29 and 30, you said?
29 of 30,
This is about the fence or wall?
subparagraph 3, swimming pools.
Okay,
The last line shall not be included.
oh, yeah, a typo.
And another little nit is the discussion about swim out seats. So as I understand, and I don't know what a swim out seat is, but it seems like I guess it's a projection from the pool walls to accommodate steps or getting in and out of the pool, I assume. And my question is, does that mean that the area around the swim out meets the same criteria as the rest of the pool? Otherwise, it seems like that would be a weakness if the swim out is in exceptions. Does that make any sense?
It's not, so the five, are you talking like with 5 feet from any structural component?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, so it has to be 5 feet away. So
Okay,
that's part of the pool.
okay,
Yeah.
good, thank you.
Do we have anything else in chapter 10?
I have time limits. Let me jump to it. It's 10:33. And currently we have every permit on an 18-month time limit from the date of issue, with a possible 6-month extension granted by the city manager. I feel that certain remodels or things like swimming pools, smaller projects don't need that long
To finish.
to finish.
Yeah.
So what you would do is you would have for these types of projects, you have say 6 months. For these types of projects, you
Yes.
have 12.
Right.
Something that, well, I guess maybe put your thoughts in writing and send them to the council and we'll discuss it in the next meeting then. Unless you already have something in mind.
No, I'll work with Louis on some times based on what he's seen.
I could see that happening. When we bought our house on 20th Street, the owner said that his pool was being constructed at the same time, same construction company as the $16 million house, which is basically a water park, you know, on Gulf Boulevard. So the crews would come and work on his for a day or two and then be gone for 2 weeks, working on the big projects and coming back and working on his. So they probably use that full time because they were doing it that way. But I don't think it should take that. I don't think they should be doing it. That, you know, they should be held to a shorter, acceptable time frame. But as Randy was saying, that may fall into the definition of that's more restrictive. And we may have to wait.
Yeah, we'll have to wait.
Yeah.
But I think it's reasonable.
Well, if the design of the pool is like really architectural where you got some slopes and all like that, do you need that a week to set up? You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Before he could probably answer.
Sure.
He was saying that the one neighbor had a pool, they would do work and then leave for a week. And I was saying, depending on the design of the pool, they may need that time for the concrete to set or whatever. Yeah. Where they could.
Pool companies provide a 28-day period.
Right.
Excuse.
Mhm.
Just like Lloyd said, they leave, put in a pool shell, disappear, don't go back 2 to 3 weeks, like, we're waiting for the concrete to do it. It cures in 7 days. 90% of it is, Lloyd knows that.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Kyle's right. Pool should be done, finished 6 months max. So he's got one next door, there is people for over a year.
Having a restrictive code like that would actually protect the homeowner.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think it would be a huge benefit, but it also may have an adverse effect. We already, there's certain markets that people don't want to come and do business in Bel Air Beach because we're a pain in the butt sometimes. So just be mindful of that also. We don't want to make it where we can't get anyone to do anything. So true. Yeah. Okay. Yes, sir.
It goes hand in hand with police. It's all about enforcement. As far as our timelines go, with that we started. I build on St. Pete Beach, we can't do anything at 7:30. We set up, we wait, because the cops are there to write us up. We start at 7:30. If the cops enforce it, you're gonna have a contract with people going. Period.
Thank you for that comment. Any other comments in chapter 10, on chapter 10? Going once, going twice.
If I could come back to, I think 10-174 was the height issue, height of a swimming pool.
74.
And my understanding, this was an issue that was addressed through, has been addressed through variances, so I thought this might be something the council would like to discuss. I'm not sure what the issues were exactly, but I did circle 10-174, paragraph G.
Mr. Reaper, would you like to address that?
Yes, I would actually refer to Mike Kelly on this one because he builds pools for a living. Yeah, he has a lot of ideas. He was here when they actually were working on this code to begin with.
So, came before council. The 2014 and were finally passed in 2016. It was a dispute of how high the pools could be built relative to the grade of the yard. Definition of grade is what started this whole scenario. Council finally passed it, that we can't, the pool can't be any higher than 18 inches above ground level. And there are so many houses, not just new construction, so many existing houses, especially in the north end of Valley Beach, where that just doesn't work. So every one of them has had to come before the variance board or either a 5-inch, 10-inch, or sometimes a 2-foot variance based on what the floor and elevation is in the house. It was very contentious when it was passed. The current engineer was the engineer with another firm when he and I both argued that 18 inches above the ground level is too restricted. It's got to be higher. Either 24, 30, or 36 inches higher, because people aren't going to be able to build pools. So we look at it as a board saying it needs a rewrite. This needs to be a complete rewrite. And maybe the ground of the road really shouldn't even come into play.
Right.
That's what this board to consider, here council to consider. Maybe that shouldn't even be a factor. The ground of the road doesn't play a factor in garages, right, Kyle?
Yes.
Then 24 inches for a garage floor above ground level. What relevance is in the pools? Every new pool in the last 2 years has had to come before our board to be built. And it needs to be rewritten. Either go much higher than the 18 inches above ground road, or we eliminate the code.
Councilmember Elliott.
What is the risk of having a higher pool?
I'm gonna, if it's okay with the council, I'm gonna call on, used to be Vice Mayor Shirley. I believe that there was something to do with the elevation that kept coming up with you, and it may be a different opinion that Mr. Kelly has. Can you refresh my memory?
Got it. And I'll say, the reference was just made of drawing a garage is at 24 inches above the ground. Pool 18 inches already, not a problem. Everything's sloping. Pool. It's gonna become a engineering. There were several, I advised personally, who didn't, not to build out drawings on slightly above grade. But it's like, well, they're out of the flood zone, and our pool steps down. It's not a 6 foot tall, but I think that was part of why this became an issue. We've got a couple of houses on our corner where they have a 6 foot wall, and the existing council at that time were opposed to that. They did not like that driveway sloped up and the wall was 6 foot, but they could see the two houses that are right on the line. They didn't like it, so that's why, that's how this came about. There's gotta be, right? I don't completely disagree with them that I don't wanna see a 6 foot wall, you know, looking onto the same story home. I don't disagree with that, but there's gotta be happy sitting below the rest of the house doesn't make sense either, and below the entire grid of dog doesn't make sense. I think we have a problem with our code in general, with our site review. I just don't think our code provides enough direction on site planning when it comes to drainage and food and hardscaping versus landscaping. There's just not enough information in our code, which is kind of why I suggested that we use a professional. I don't know what that should look like, but a professional should know what other things, how it should be.
Thank you, Mr. Beam.
The thing that, a few times in my neighborhood, you've got a pool that's 8 foot above grade, and they look down on the neighbor's side. That privacy is. And again, like Jody said, the walls between homes. Again, you're gonna have to look at other safety issues. Either glass, railing, and some type of railing to keep people falling off the 6 foot wall. Between homes.
Thank you.
Are we talking adjacent grade, crown on the road, or adjacent grade to the property? Because there's big differences here when you measure.
Crown of the road, both the residents.
Try that.
So you're taking the crown, is that in the code, the crown of the road? Yeah, okay. It's not the adjacent grade of the road?
Chief, I have a swimming pool, should not be higher than 18 inches above the ground of the road. It's on your property.
And if you're building up, you're fortifying your property, then your pool is actually below grade. I see where you're going with this.
Jody's right, it's all related to water drainage off the lot. Can't go into your neighbor's property.
Right.
So you build a pool, the house too high, the pool too high. How are you gonna keep the water from going up to his property? Let's put up pools.
Yeah, and some of these are built up so high that there's a big ditch between them, a giant ravine.
Our code say you can't dump water at the neighbor's property.
Right.
That's in there.
Yeah.
We look at that for every variance to say, what is the elevation of this proposed pool going to do to the neighbor's property?
Yeah, this is something that I'm really not all that familiar with. I know what my one neighbor, or not really neighbor, but on my street. She took like 8 inches of water in a dahlia, and I helped her sandbag her house, young girl, but her pool is actually about 2 feet above her sliding doors, which is 10 feet from the pool. So the water comes in off the pool, goes right into the sliding doors. Now there's a drain there. And I'm thinking like, who the hell architect this or engineered this, you know? And I told her to pump that pool way out. She only took like 6 inches out, so she got the rest of it in the house, but, yeah.
Well, yes, sir.
Another problem that comes in is after a home is built. And the landscape come on, and they start putting walls, trees, and they'll build up that property. I had that situation from my house, they're 6 inches higher than me. So every time we have a deluge of water is coming right in higher.
So I guess the question is, if we alter the pool code? Are we creating more problems somewhere else? Or should we consider actually hiring an architectural engineer that can look at our code and make the best suggestion? And I'm sure it's going to be different for each neighborhood. It wouldn't be just like we. Yeah.
Yeah, we've been taking notes and there is a separate drainage section and you're right, it's all interrelated and I'm not an engineer or an architect, but I have access to those resources that we can look at.
Did
so.
you feel all the fingers pointing at you just?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We've been taking notes and yeah, it is a complicated issue and it is related to the drainage section as well, which we will be going over separately. But yeah, I'd like to have somebody who's knowledgeable in these issues to look at it on my behalf. I'd like information on the variances as well, if someone could send me those. And yeah, we'd be glad to provide some recommendations.
Do you have engineering resources?
We do. We're an engineering firm with planners.
Would it be too much to ask Mr. Kelly to maybe redline this and reword Smith it a little bit? I mean, this is his livelihood. I mean, I don't mean to throw it on your lap, but I mean, you probably could come up with a better answer to all this than all of us.
That's what I'm personally saying. It's not going to him, it's going to you, it's just.
Yeah, but it,
I'm raising, we're gonna still use the crown of the road. I'm saying we've gotta take that.
well, that's why I'm asking you, maybe if you could redline this thing and wordsmith it in there.
What's your average right now? Whenever you're doing a variance, what are we talking about?
They're 5 inches, 6 inches. Tony's was 14 inches. That's the most, Kyle, I think we had in 2 years.
Well, we had the one that was a remodel that was well over, but we
4 inches.
could see that there was no effect on the neighboring property. They had a lot of land in the correct drainage and their pool was already at that level.
Minimum, you gotta take this up, if we're gonna still use the crown of the road, is higher than 24, or probably 30 or 36. Riding, we want to put that down, I will. We think if you go to that 36 plateau, you shouldn't see many variances. The one that Kyle just talking about, the remodel of the pool, where the house is built up so high, and the pool is built up so high, there's no relevance or problem with drainage adjacent to it that the board did pass. I think it was what.
And you're suggesting 36 inches?
I think we should take him up on his offer before he changes his mind.
Yeah. I just, the one thing that I don't want to do is accidentally create more problems. And I think that there needs to be some sort of a check valve on more of a sanity check of maybe anything above 18, maybe you should have some kind of a survey done that somebody certifies that this is not going to impact your neighbors. That's a suggestion. Wait, Jody Shirley.
That, what saying, well, one, it be involved, that's low, right? So that's gotta be low. But I think that, as part of the permit, you should have a drainage plan. That's where we're dropping the ball here. And the same as you're doing any construction, you should be required to put gutters and downspouts, and those should be required to be piped off the property into the, into the ocean, and the water line, otherwise into the, front of the home, into the street. So you're not, you're certain that it's not recognizing. We have so many drainage problems, and none of that is being addressed. It's a problem. I mean, and I can tell you, we are allowing too much impervious area. I have a neighbor who's building every foot of his yard concrete or above. And so he's not absorbing anything. That's what we're running.
Thank you.
Don't we need to do then something? I agree with what you just said, something with floodplain management then? I mean,
Well, you've heard plenty tonight, and maybe what you should do is take everything that you've heard and come back with something that that can be presented to us, and maybe every piece of code that's impacted by these changes, we just get, but maybe we have a second look. Obviously, you're going to have talented individuals looking at it with you, but they may actually want to come down and ride our neighborhoods and see if this code was applied here on this construction, how would it impact the neighbors?
We'll take a look. And I know there are drainage regulations in the city, and maybe they're not being enforced when through the process. So that might be another issue, but we'll look at these.
Okay.
Definitely been scribbling notes.
Yes, sir.
That's a very good point.
That's true. And maybe there needs to be, unfortunately, it's more restrictive, but there probably needs to be code that once it's built, you can't just elevate your property on a whim. Maybe it requires permitting.
There's no permanent landscape.
Anything landscape.
And you're talking about landscapers after the project is done. You're not talking about the finished grade of the land for landscaping, because that has a site plan on it.
Even in existing home, the
Yeah.
landscapers come in and they're adding.
Okay, that's, I understand. Yeah. I'm thinking that when the pool's being built, you have a site plan where it says this is the elevation and that's it. Okay, that's followed. Okay.
And
Once the house is got, that's when they come. and-
Right, all right,
Right.
all right.
and as a function of just in part administration, but also the legal side of this, I understand that the lawyer's role is in the common parlance to be the naysayer. I want to issue spot for you and identify, you are a small municipality. You do have very capable people, and I mean that truly, that knowing your team here. You also have limited resources. Your budget being a statement of your priorities and where you put your resources, that's one thing. But as you talk about additional permitting requirements, additional inspection requirements, you're creating bureaucracy that's going to require resources that you may not presently have. That doesn't mean you can't establish them or put funding behind additional permitting tax, and understanding that a lot of that's been outsourced to the county, and how much support are you getting in that administration? But I just, sometimes the disconnect that can happen between what our regulations say and then how they get administered, and you've got your law enforcement is contracted out, your building services are contracted out. You do have people in the here and now, but just understanding that limitation, I think it's worthwhile as you consider how robust you wish to make your regulatory framework.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Anything else on chapter 10? All right, so let's move on to chapter 22. It's probably not going to take as long, but after 22, we'll take a bathroom break, and then we'll get back on the 30 and 50.
All right, chapter 22 is environment. It's not environment in the sense of the natural environment. This article deals with nuisances. I think one of the issues that we discussed, that Kyle and I discussed, was section 2233, prohibited conditions, declaration of a nuisance. Number 24 under that section is children's toys. Adding to that section, exempting basketball hoops, so those are not considered a nuisance when you set up a basketball hoop in your yard.
Well,
They are at 4 in the morning.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this deals with things like children's toys, bicycles, skateboards, garbage cans, tools, or any other portable items that are not part of the natural landscape shall not be left on the owner's property and visible from the street longer than for 24 hours. So, bicycles, skateboards. The question is, I guess these movable basketball hoops, do you want to exempt those? Is that an issue? If I'm understanding this correctly.
Council?
Yes, you're talking about the type of basketball hoop that the base basically is full of sand and.
Yeah. That's my understanding.
That's concreted into the ground.
Yes, because this would fall under the other portable items. So,
I know personally, I've had a couple of those for my grandchildren, but that's not something you want to move.
Yeah.
It's very heavy. Even though it's quote portable. So I would agree with exempting that,
all right.
because it's not typically left randomly. It'd be like, if you had a two-car garage, it would typically be right between the two garages, something like that, so it looks symmetrical and it's not unattractive, I don't believe.
Councilmember Elliott, you had a comment?
I'm, now I have mixed feelings about this, because when I heard this, it's saying portable items, basketball hoop, I'm thinking Fisher Price. You know,
Peanuts or something.
yeah, and people leave them sitting out for a
Yeah.
long time, and I don't want to see that,
Correct.
put those toys away, so, and then the portable hoops, they deteriorate more. I mean, I guess people have a choice as to whether they want to affix one permanently or whether they want to have one portable, and if it's portable, move it perhaps.
I think the only problem with the portable ones that I have is the fact that whenever we have storms, they are a hazard.
Yeah, I didn't even think of that.
We have to define the term portable. I need to define it with regards to the height of the basketball hoop and the weight. Because the ones that I've seen and used, the bottom is plastic of some type, and then the actual pole is a normal metal basketball pole.
It's almost like
Yeah.
an umbrella.
Yeah, you
thing.
usually have two wheels in the back where you can tilt the pole.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then
So
you
you can
fill
roll
it,
it.
and you fill the middle with wood or whatever, sand.
Sand, yeah. Sand and water combos,
Yeah.
theoretically supposed to be the heaviest, but yeah. That's something we can work.
If you put one together, it's going to stay there until you're tired of it. And
Yes.
That's just it. No one's gonna move those things around and park them everywhere.
I'd like to see how you're gonna get sand and water out of that thing.
Yeah.
Without busting it up.
So the basketball hoops, everybody good with that? Yes, no?
I'm good with it, but we would need to define it because
Define
as
it,
Kim
yeah.
said, so if it's something that's 3 feet tall and
Right.
weighs 15 pounds and it's just laying in the yard, that should be moved.
Right.
So we could give it some definition regarding the height and the weight.
And the reason I brought it up is because it's just a decision point. I drive around, I see basketball hoops, they're to me toys. We say you can't have toys in your yard.
But then you see the ones that the guy put 10 cinder blocks on top of it. Yeah, I'm not around here, I don't see it, but if you drive around, look around, and
Just on top of the base.
stop with the
Right.
base or the old couch. Yeah,
I have noticed in that same area, section 22 dash 33. Subsection 4, any condition that provides harborage for rats, mice, snakes, other vermin and pests, etc. I've had a couple of neighbors complain about other neighbors where they had fruit trees. And we have, along with the fruit trees, the fruit rats. So some of those homes are only occupied 6 months a year. And 4,000 mangoes fall off on the ground.
Mm.
And then all the rats come as a result of that. So that's, when I read that, that's what I thought of. I talked to my neighbor, now he's there all the time and he loves fruit trees, which is wonderful. He gives me fruit all the time from his fruit trees. But several months ago, he was overtaken by fruit rats. First time I saw one going across my fence, I thought it was a squirrel. Next, I found one inside my grill when I opened the cover of the grill and he just was right there. So that was exciting. But he put traps out, didn't want to poison them. So he put the old fashioned traps and he killed 18 in 2 days.
Wow.
In his garage. So they can reproduce quickly. And if they get up in your attic,
no,
it certainly is a problem.
could I bring the black snakes down to your neighborhood?
And Councilmember, I don't think you were suggesting to do so. I just want to be cautious about legislating around our natural habitat. I have seen attempts at doing so in other communities. It's perilous and frankly impossible in some respects. Certainly nuisance properties, overgrowth, on, you know, those sorts of things are dealt with. One thing we'll have to be mindful of in a general sense, again, another legal concern, as we talk about these different restrictions, or regulations better stated, is our equal protection notions of making sure we're evenly treating property owners.
Sure.
It's very hard when you start trying, and I'm not suggesting you were saying this, but there's a temptation when you do things like this of making a distinction between, well, a year-round resident can do this, but a resident who's here 6 months
Right.
has to do that, and that becomes very difficult to, if not impossible to administer, and may present other legal challenges. So just being mindful of those sorts of concerns.
Thank you.
Yes.
I mean, it does seem that we have nuisance rules on not maintaining the property. And I would think that if you have, 2 feet of rotting fruit sitting on it, that might be considered a nuisance.
Potentially. Yeah.
Just like leaves or anything else that you're not maintaining it. And I do like the idea of promoting an environment that supports animals, and animals come and eat all that fruit, which is nice. I had a question about noise. And there was a definition that had yelling, but it seemed to be limited to, let's see, where was it? I'm sorry, I don't mean to hold you while I look
It's
at
10 and
that.
12, Division 2. 10 and 12 is the noise section.
How close are you to Gulf Boulevard, if I may ask?
For Gulf Boulevard.
Yeah.
One house between my house and Gulf Boulevard.
Now, do you hear,
Oh, here it is.
loud boom, I don't, they're not boom boxes, showing my age, but cars going down with the windows, especially from Clearwater back and forth with the radio blaring. I call them trikes, the 3-wheel vehicles, and they got the radio in volume 10. Because there was a law passed, I believe, 2 years ago, limiting noise from your vehicle. I think if you could hear it more than 20 feet or 15 feet. I don't know if Randy is.
I'm generally familiar with that. What I would tell you is I've very recently deeply litigated the issue of noise ordinances. It's something that I can definitely look at in terms of where your code is relative to current statutes and also current legal norms relative to like plainly audible standards versus objective measurements. There is not a requirement that you have a specific decibel reading, for example, as long as you have either temporal or proximity limitations that might be relevant, like if it can be heard more than 150 feet from the front property line from where the sound is emanating, restrictions like that. So I can look at your noise code in addition to whatever your planner may add as planning norms. I'm obviously not equipped to say that as we sit here now, but I'm very familiar with this. And if your noise ordinance is something you'd like more carefully reviewed as part of this process, I'm happy to do so.
Well, what I'm referencing is.
Are you referencing the state statute relative to sound emanating from vehicles?
Yeah, because especially around the causeway, okay? And this time of year, you get people stop there for a long period of time because they're waiting for the people in the side streets, the people in the causeway, people right around there. Some of these people just have the volume up to 10. And you can hear it. You can hear it almost at the city hall if they're at
Yes, sir.
and that is a violation, is it?
It may be of the statute. I'd have to look at the statutory language. I will tell you, one of the challenges with that statute is, let's say you're sitting here, I'm the meeting with Dave, somebody drives by, with the mayor, and somebody drives by making that noise, you call your deputy. By the time they even figure out which vehicle it is, they're either over the causeway or in their garage, but
Oh, yeah, but I'm just
Yeah.
saying, it can be annoying. I sympathize with the people that, like, boy, he lives right on there.
Yeah, and to answer your question, if I'm in my house and the windows are closed and the door's shut, I don't hear anything that's out on Gulf Boulevard. If I walk out my kitchen door into the garage and those same noises are being produced, they sound pretty loud.
You
So-
have probably hurricane windows, right?
I have double pane. I don't know what they're rated for because they were put in a while ago, but knock on wood, whoever built that house did a lot of nice work for sound insulation because I really don't hear anything. It's amazing. I've even made that comment to my wife.
Yes.
My thanks to Mr. Roberts for pointing out the section I was looking for. But it is 22-61 on page 10, and it's item 4, yelling, shouting, etc. It's creating similar noises on the public streets. And I wonder why we have the limitation of on the public streets. Might we delete that? Because if you're screaming in the house, if you're screaming in the pool, if you're having a party in the backyard, you're not on the public street.
That's certainly language we can review. I will tell you the other concern I have just hearing that language is your streets and sidewalks are the most traditional public fora as it relates to First Amendment speech. And so if somebody is out on your not obstructing traffic, which is its own statutory violation, most especially after following the 2023 legislative session, or 2022 legislative session, but the concern of if somebody's out there saying, you know, God is Savior, repent now, and somebody says, well, they're yelling on our city sidewalk or street, as long as they're not impeding traffic flow or anything else, that should, I would have concerns about enforcing something like that. And so that's language that we should definitely look at and make sure we're harmonizing it with those constitutional norms.
Makes sense. Getting back to nuisances, I'm not seeing, I see that there's a lot of lines to look through at one time, but I know that we're very protective of trying to prevent trees and shrubs and everything from getting out of hand, but I really don't see where it's violating your next door neighbor, where you've got this big tree and now it's growing way over and over the fence and into the neighbor's yard. And now you've got 6 feet of overgrowth and shade that you didn't ask for and don't care about. Do we have something like that in our code now?
Yes,
Could you tell me where it is?
it's not this section. I think it's 94.
So it's not considered a nuisance. It's in a different section of the.
Yeah,
of the
I
code.
mean, there's a couple sections that kind of cross over.
So we'll be covering that at the next meeting, correct?
Right now.
Yeah, we do have more comments on the landscaping section
Okay.
and maintenance of landscaping and clear zones and things like that.
We go back to what Kim was saying about number 4. Are you suggesting you just eliminate the word public streets?
Yes.
I agree with you.
It's section 94-69, green yard landscaping requirements for yards abutting public.
Okay.
Yeah. Landscaping is covered in multiple chapters, like a little bits here and there.
Yeah, I was just wondering if we needed to declare certain things to be a nuisance because they are.
Yeah. There's other cities that establish protected trees, so if someone has an oak tree and it's growing older, they actually won't let it get cut. It has to get a permit, so.
Yeah.
We're not exactly a tree city. We have very little laws against trees.
One over Bel Air Beach.
Yeah.
Other concerns in chapter 22?
Just what I brought up about clarifying Kim's 2261-4. I think we should eliminate the word public streets. Is that, I know you were talking about this, Randy, would that be a?
Eliminating it would be the direction I would probably go. I just want to make sure that because I'm not intimately familiar with the language, I'd want to make sure that I'm looking at the ill it's attempting to address and see, because if it's otherwise addressed by, for example, the statute that was adopted in 2022 that specifically prevents stopping, impeding, retarding, slowing, all the other verbs and synonyms, the flow of traffic and pedestrian, well, then we don't have a need for any kind of corollary code provision because there's a Florida statute on it, whether it's constitutional or not. And so I think we'd probably move in the direction of eliminating that language. I'm just reluctant to commit to doing it until I've looked at it in context.
Yeah.
Kim, how about the 10 PM and 7 AM? Is there
I think that's fine.
You,
But I have experienced like loud partying going on.
yeah, I've had neighbors complain about kids in the pool, especially, you know.
Yeah, and if it finishes by 10, fine, but if it goes until 1 AM, which I
Mm.
have experienced, or
Short-term running.
yeah. Another one was just. This sounds crazy, but there was, no, I won't say it, never mind. But anyway, loud noises are, fine, people can have fun, but let's be quiet at night, wherever you are.
I would actually recommend to remove the word particularly. To say between the hours of 10 and 7, otherwise, I don't know how we're going to enforce that. So somebody said, well, it says particularly between 10 and 7, and it's now 4 in the afternoon. And I'm raising Cain on the back of my pickup truck going down Gulf Boulevard. They're going to point to that and say, I don't really think that applies.
Wouldn't it be better just to strike that whole list from public streets to the period that after AM, 7 AM?
Right, or just remove that whole
You know what I'm saying?
phrase, particularly between the hours of 10 PM and 7 AM.
Yeah.
It's such a matter.
I think this is, Randy will take a look at it and,
Okay.
do his harmonizing.
My last question is a general one. There were several sections where a penalty is imposed, based on, an interest rate. And I'm just wondering what the current trend is, like 12% is listed in this ordinance. Is there a current trend to instead post it to 2% over a benchmark of some sort, or just how are people generally handling that?
I'm really surprised that we have this as an ordinance at all. Because it seems to me that it should be more of a discussed and set by resolution. Instead of just having it memorialized forever until you have to do an ordinance change. So instead of setting 12%, you have set by the council by resolution. And then that way, as interest goes up, you can raise it up. As interest drops down, you can lower it down, but we should have the flexibility to be able to change that.
Well, that's why using a benchmark might work. So whatever that is, if it's the government rate, if it's the CPI, whatever that benchmark
Right.
is, but then you say 4% over that or 2%
Over
over
prime,
that,
say.
yeah. I'm just wondering what the current trend is.
Because I'm not intimately familiar with the language, I want to make sure I understand. Is that language saying that code enforcement fines shall be subject to interest accrual, or is it use of interest in another way?
It's unpaid,
Well-
unpaid fines and liens on property.
Right, are subject to, I believe that there's a statutory figure set for that. I want to say it's 6-something%. I could be wrong about that, just conflating it perhaps with post-judgment interest in the civil context. But I know it's not explicit in chapter 162. I think it may be elsewhere, which chapter 162 is the Florida statute governing code enforcement fines, fees and liens. So I'd look at the legal authority on it. I think we usually do it as judgment interest that would accrue with a judgment. But I'd look at that. I would not have it set. I agree with the mayor that I would not have it set in your code, one, so that if it does change by statute, you don't have to be concerned about that. And two, if it is something that we can set unilaterally, and I'm not sure that we can, but if it is, then have it set by resolution and adjust it as appropriate without the need for 2 readings. And now a business impact statement and all those sorts of trappings that come with ordinances.
Well, and again, if it's a benchmark, it eliminates the need to take annual action.
I think it all begins with a Florida statute and then we go from there. If we're able to, we may not even be legally allowed to charge 12%.
Correct.
It may
So
be
we need to
serious.
look into that.
And that's a general comment we've made, where fees are listed as well, just to reference a resolution.
What else?
Any comments out there? No? Well, in that case, we want to take a 5-minute break,
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Chapter
Tim.
30.
and then we'll get right back on it, all right?
7:30.
Yeah, 7:30 will work.
Twentieth Street, which effectively is right and it's right, obviously it's right next to Main Street Beach.
Oh, yeah, of
area,
course.
Right there.
in Rocks Beach since they did the dune restoration.
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
How does theirs look? I haven't seen there.
So you have houses, it's got it done, then nothing, and then houses again.
I'll tell you, the ones that didn't get it done are foolish. Because that's where the water's going.
Of course.
It's like a map now.
It's a giant funnel.
Yeah.
I think thinking.
Please, let me know.
All right. It's close enough to 7:30. We're back at it. And now we are at chapter 30.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, this chapter deals with seawalls, and then, restrictions on boats and marinas, or the marina, rules at the marina. We had some minor comments on this. I think one of the things that we're recommending is the added definition of catwalk, because there are regulations dealing with catwalks and no definition. But other than that, just open it up for your discussion.
And what was the suggestion, that the fix for the catwalk problem?
Just defining it, that it's essentially it's a small dock, not more than 3 feet wide, I think is what we found as other definitions.
For us.
We have a definition under section 30-53. Under subsection J.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty precise, whenever.
Yeah,
Oh, 4 feet, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I think I saw that. Let me see.
Oh, it still doesn't define what a catwalk is. It has the,
part of a dock structure, but no wider than 4 feet.
Yeah, it does have the 4 foot restriction, but yeah, I think I'd recommend just adding a little bit more particular what that is. But it does, that does have the restrictions on the 4 feet wide and no longer than 45 feet from a seawall, but I think there's also regulations of how far they can be out from a dock. But that was really our only comment, other than correcting some terminology and references to other statutes.
All right. Any comments on this section, council?
I have one on page 11. Subparagraph 9, aircraft operation. I just wanted to confirm whether that includes drones. It doesn't specify drones.
Page 11, you say?
Yes,
Oh, it talks about unmanned aircraft.
so I think that includes drones, but would it be helpful to add that needs to be clear?
Well, it
Unregistered
states
manned or-
model or remote operated aircraft, and I believe that would cover drones.
Okay, good.
And we just have to look as well at, there is some degree of preemption relative to the regulation of drones. We'd want to make sure that we're in line with whatever those state and federal preemptions are.
I'm gonna tell you, this is probably code that will eventually have to go away because Amazon is probably one of the largest lobbyists in the whole world.
Oh, yeah.
And I think the future is they're gonna be delivering stuff by drone. And it's something we'll see very soon. And so that would shoot this down, so to speak.
And similarly in that regard, while you're talking about aerial approaches, there's already preemptions that prevent cities from regulating or preventing autonomous vehicles from operating on their roadways. So as we talk about transportation regulations, we'll have to make sure we're consistent with statutory
Yeah,
schemes.
that has interstate commerce issues.
Yes,
And-
Mr. Roberts.
Thank you, sir. And Kyle, number 10 in that same area that's referencing fireworks, where it says at the end that if somebody wants to do fireworks on the beach, they have to come and get written permission from the city manager. Has anybody ever done that? Because of course, any 4th of July or New Year's, right across the street from where I live on the beach, and we go out there to enjoy it. There's plenty of people out there that put off a fair amount of fireworks right from the beach. So,
They never do.
pardon,
They don't.
they don't? Oh, they never come to you and ask for a
No.
permit, right?
It's prohibited in the city.
Correct.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
So,
Oh, and
I don't know if they leave this open for if we wanted a specific vendor to do fireworks or something. I'm
yeah,
not sure why that, except.
maybe they're asking just even a family, if they wanted to get permission. I don't know. So what would you do? Somebody came to you and said, hey, want to do fireworks?
I wouldn't permit it.
Okay, because our city doesn't allow that, period.
those may have been Bellash people too. They have those big parties and fireworks.
It's always those people.
Yes.
Just kidding.
I wonder if that's in their muni code, prohibit fireworks. Probably is.
Within our city
I'm
limits.
talking about Dollar Shores.
What else?
Seawalls, there's been a lot of mention of just, maintenance of seawalls. I don't know if there's something we can add just to give more language to maintaining your seawall. As we talk about the requirements of building one, I know a lot of this, our code, gets into some of the constructional requirements and specifications, but they're not all up to date, but that doesn't really matter in our case because the county covers that when they do the inspections. But we do, it might be helpful to mention things about draining correctly out the seawall as well in our code.
That's a good catch, because it does relate to construction and criteria for how to build one, but it doesn't address maintenance.
Well, there was a big problem with one. What was it, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that completely collapsed into the water. And they almost lost their pool because of it. It was, you could see a clear crack going end to end on their seawall. I don't know if there was any fine or if there was, I don't know what the outcome of that was other than, well, they got it fixed, they got a new seawall, but I think we were aware of it and that they had applied for permit, but by the time they did it, it was too late. Then there's the argument, well, how do you even check on that? How do you know if someone's seawall is in disarray? Yes, sir.
How many years ago, I picked manual martial art. And city stuff that was not needed, took it out, and added the language into the information. Finally got a copy of it. There's basic things you can see that should warn an owner. You have a crack cap. If you don't have any weed bulbs, which are now required in the seawall.
Yeah.
If you have any horizontal cracks across. If you have any sinking around behind the seawall. And it's low tide between December and February. Inspect it once a year and see how much space is between the lower portions of the bridge. And just it's a flag up thing. One, qualified.
Well, and I think that the problem we had with it was that if they don't want you on their property, you don't have to allow them on their property. Yeah, Kyle, would you like to comment on this conversation?
So, We do have this manual and it does give a lot of informational. Like material that I think is beneficial for the resident if we circulate it just so that they are knowledgeable of what they may not know is happening to their seawall.
I remember it's educational.
Yeah,
For
when
the-
it comes
for
to
the homeowner.
enforcement. I defer to Randy on that because it becomes like unless we're gonna hire somebody who's qualified to make that call. Based on what they can inspect. I mean, I think it could be done if we brought an engineer out on a boat. And they could get close to the seawall, and it wouldn't be on a person's property.
See, that's the problem is that we don't have the staff that's qualified to say this has to be fixed. And so then it
You don't have to have staff say if there's basic, 5 basic problems. That even a seawall engineer would okay, say if you've got one of those 5 conditions. you should have your seawall.
right.
Yeah, I would say, I think the discourse is just in the interest of facilitating some motion forward on this. I think the discourse is sort of going past each other. The gentleman from the public is talking about more of public service announcement, guidance, providing resources to the public so that property owners who, let's say, you have property owners who have relocated from the Midwest, have their seawall for the first time, aren't familiar with that, and saying, here are resources the city offers as you continue to maintain your own property. That's one thing. What you folks are concerned with as the legislative body is regulations, and then by extension, how that police power is wielded. And I think the
Right.
mayor's concerns are valid in terms of, do we have the means and resources if we're going to regulate this in some way beyond saying you can't have unsafe structures generally on the property, any restrictions in the Florida Building Code or otherwise on unsafe structures. If you're going to say it's a violation to have X, how are you going to police X, regardless of what X is, if it's parking 8 inches from a curb or the condition of your seawall, as you consider regulations and amending your land development code. And I don't think this falls into that category, but I would just caution in relative to like virtue signaling type regulations, where like we're doing this to enhance awareness. Because that works fine as a philosophical notion until Lloyd's sitting on his back porch and calls Kyle and says, hey, I see that our code in section 66.7 says this, and Kyle says, well, we don't really have the means to enforce it. It's just there so people know not to do it. It's kind of like a thank you for not smoking sign. You don't want that in your code, because if you can't administer it, then you shouldn't have it. Because it creates unreasonable expectations by the public of their government, and then, an unreasonable burden for government. You don't want to put your public work staff, your deputies, or anybody else in that sort of predicament. And so I'm not suggesting you shouldn't regulate this particular issue, just again, a word of advice as we endeavor on this process.
Yeah, and it's subject to, yes, sir.
That seawall that went in was foundation. That pool wasn't really safe. You look how long it takes to come back, compact the soil. That seawall event or that pool eventually.
Mhm.
Not to say what kind of damage is happening to the neighbor's seawall. That's the problem. All right, somebody doesn't take care of theirs. What ramifications are the people on the side?
Right.
That's the issue. Yeah. So how do we protect the people that care? Somebody. And when you buy a home, I bought mine 20, 30 years ago. There were no requirements to even have a building. Wow. And I found I needed it. But did you have any realtor telling you about your seawall, or you have it inspected? No, that's the problem.
Yeah, well, and you can't enforce what a realtor does not say. You can't control it. And if I'm trying to sell a $1 million piece of property, last thing I'm going to do is tell them they're going to have to spend $100,000 for a new seawall as soon as they move in. I don't really know if there's a good solution unless we hired somebody and they were qualified, certified in some way, and then still would have to have access to the property.
We just came up with an idea of say, he about the code that it behooves you to have your seawall inspected every year, make sure that it's intact and safe, whatever. I don't know.
Didn't we just do a manual 2 years ago for seawalls?
Well, that's he helped
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
that, but the manual is only suggested.
Sure, yeah.
It's only, this is our recommended process, or this is your recommended process, but it's not anything that we currently have a method of enforcing.
Well, we do have in the manual, like you're not allowed to paint a seawall. You know, it has to be a natural, stay in natural form because you can hide cracks and everything else in the place epoxy paint, but.
I will point out, section 1074, which we were on previously, does require the seawalls be maintained in accordance with the seawall manual adopted by the council.
Oh, really?
It says no person shall occupy or let another or let to another for occupancy any residential or non-residential property that does not comply with the following requirements. And last on the list is the seawall manual adopted by the city. So it is referenced at least.
I'm wondering, can failure to maintain a seawall be a nuisance?
It is if it falls in.
Well, that's why I'm looking at page 2 of 12, which was the definition of nuisance. It includes anything which is the suffering or permitting any condition to be or to exist. And it either in any way renders any person's insecure in life or the use of property, or essentially interferes with the comfortable enjoyment of life and property, or depreciates the value of the property of others. So if you don't maintain your seawall and you're the neighbor, property value is going to go down. You're not going to enjoy your home with
Right.
the risk of that.
Again, but how is this enforceable? I don't see it right now. Even requiring, let's just say that every seawall in Bel Air Beach, it was required by an ordinance that you had to have your seawall inspected every, say, 20 years or 10 years or something like that. I mean, is that even enforceable? Is that something that we could do?
That reference to the seawall manual is under the building maintenance section, so it's similar to any other unsafe building condition.
But how do you prove? How do you prove that? And that's the problem.
Well, yeah, I don't know. It's similar to the other building issues, I would think, but yeah, it's a good question.
I mean, if having weeds in your yard is a nuisance, it seems like we ought to be able to say, oh, I see cracks in the seawall. That's a big problem.
Here's just a dumb question. Does your property end at the seawall or do you actually have rights like maybe 5 feet, 10 feet?
Your property is in the water.
And so how far can you go up to, the question you raised earlier? I can't go on the property to inspect the seawall. So how close could I really even get to the seawall with my boat to inspect?
Well, that's a different story. Completely different rules. You can take your boat right up to their seawall.
Oh, you can, all right.
It's rude as hell, but yeah, you can do it.
Okay.
Yeah, there's people that fish. They'll pull right up to your dock. They'll get right under your boat and they'll be fishing. And there's really nothing you can do about it.
Crab trapping. Well, I didn't know. That's why I asked.
Okay, other comments on chapter 30?
I would just ask if our attorney could weigh in on that and look at, is there a way to enforce the condition of a seawall?
Absolutely, you can enforce the idea that any structure on your property, on a property must be maintained in a safe manner consistent with whether it's the Florida Building Code, if there's some other statutory national standard pointing to that. My concern comes when you talk about, for example, sub 14 that's been raised relative to your manual. Is the language in there actually prohibitive or is it aspirational? If it says you should do this and you don't do it, that's not necessarily a violation. And again, what is the probative element? Like, for example, if we have in there that you should, as the mayor was sort of alluding to, that you must have your seawall inspected every 20 years. What kind of database and record are we maintaining? How often are we soliciting? Are our records consistent such that we can actually prove that that seawall has not been inspected? Because we're going to have the burden of proof if we're ready to take them to a magistrate or local ordinance violation court. But yes, you can certainly say, just in the same way we can a shed, a house, or any other structure, if a structure is not sound and presents a danger by virtue of what's the word I'm thinking of? Decomposition isn't the right word, but you get what I'm getting at. If it's fallen into disrepair, just like if we had a house without a roof on it and the windows open, if we have adopted, for example, SUBAC, the safe and I forget the language. There's two different codes, SUBAC and another one that are adopted usually as building maintenance standards for nuisance properties and the like. If we have something like that, we can enforce that. Whether the dock is the square peg that fits or the seawall is the square peg that fits in that round hole, I'd have to look at what those provisions are to see if there's language in those specific to those kinds of structures and what standards are in place.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that and not a whole bureaucratic system in terms of inspections and all of that, but just, okay, you didn't maintain your property.
Right.
What can we do about it?
Mr. Beam. Yes, sir.
City replaced, walkway between Harrison and falling apart. So the city had to inspect the seawall. 22nd Street Bridge seawall, the structure of that bridge was inspected and repaired. And how many other seawalls have been replaced? Carlisle, 16th Street.
That's because
City.
it's because the original seawalls were over 70 years old. And so
Many of the seawalls here have not been touched. You can see just floating around the boat as you have and I have. Conditions of it.
I have an original seawall.
You got an advance.
Well, I'm also having it redone at the tune of about 40K.
How old is it? If I may ask.
From day one, like 64.
Oh.
Actually back at 58.
Yep. Other comments on this section?
And if anybody permits a dock, the dimensions on there as well, you're supposed to follow. Many of those docks, I think, are not in place that they should be. So after a project like that's finished, in fact, that would be the county's responsibility. To inspect, verify, and all of it has to say in the code is the inspector has to verify the measurements on the dock.
I would say that would be a big problem. I think instead of waiting until the dock is finished, maybe there should be a sign off on the poles as soon as they're placed. The outlying poles that determine the shape and size of your dock structure. Even then, who's the guy who's doing that? Who's going to survey it?
Line along the fence.
Again, who's going to do that?
They have to do it to set the poles. That's the only way they can sell.
They do,
They,
but
seawall.
yes. And so,
Inspector doing his job, he should sign off on the job, he should know what.
and
Then he's not doing the job.
and Kyle, you said that they have no way of.
I would say that's determined by the county, and if we put these requirements on them, they may opt to have us find another inspector. something independent of them. I don't think we can make them inspect
You
that way.
make sure that maybe that's part of the contract with the sequel company, need to verify. And if they sign on the dotted line, they verify the measurement. Then they have to do it.
Well, I think in any plans, they're swearing to those measurements, so if we ever find differently, they're held responsible.
Yeah, and I can tell you that I've had multiples, whenever I was first looking at this, I paid an engineering firm to come out, survey my property, come up with a design plan. They drew it all up. It was beautiful and they were wrong. And then another company came in and they surveyed it and I got something else and they were wrong. And whenever I did it myself, I was right. But my point is it's subjective. It's everyone's opinion as to actually how it really does work. I think really, it's more of a self-regulation with the neighbors, actually calling it out, sort of like what we did with the couple that were building there. It wasn't them. It was the dock builder was actually putting it in the channel going under the bridge. And they were creating a huge hazard. They were following their plan and their plan was wrong or something. Or maybe they weren't following their plan, but enough citizens were concerned that they called city manager. He called the dock company and they checked again and they admitted, oh yeah, we've made a big mistake, and they had to move everything. So there's partial responsibility of the neighbors to be watching what's going in.
Issue. Like a company sell the town by the people are watching.
Yeah. My next door neighbor, he's a great guy. He had a dock design, put it in. He said, I made it just like yours, and he did. Well, whenever they were ready to start installing the boat lift, now he has a large straight lot. Whenever they were getting ready to install the boat lift, and he asked me what I thought about it, and I did some measuring, and if they had actually moved forward and installed the boat lift, it would have been about 1.5 feet from the property line. And no one caught it. No one caught it. So they didn't install it. And now they're stuck with this dock with a cutout for a boat lift and they're just stuck with it. So, yeah, I know all of this is history, but my point is that there's some personal responsibility to make sure that it's done right, because you may encounter an issue with your neighbor, and that's where the real problem happens.
Docks are also addressed in chapter 94, which we'll talk about some more. So this is more of the construction part of it. But the location of them and other regulations, we'll have another shot at.
All right. Anything else in this section? If not, then we will move on to chapter 50.
Yes, chapter 50 is streets, sidewalks, and other public ways. And to clarify, this is not the design of streets and sidewalks and when you have to build them. That's covered under subdivision and development. But this is more of what can go on in streets and sidewalks and other public ways. The only comment we had on this was in 50-1 roadway intersection visibility. We're just recommending that the site visibility triangle be clarified a little more. I think this was something that Kyle mentioned, and yeah, we noticed as well, you could probably tighten that up where you are specifying what can be done within certain elevations within that site triangle, which is 50-1B. So typically, codes will clarify that you have to keep a clear zone between 2.5 feet above grade to 10 feet above grade for visibility purposes. So that's our only comment, is just adding that. And we've had some minor comments throughout, but that's probably the only one I think worth discussing.
In your travels, Kyle, around the city, do you see that very often, where whether it's bushes or a fence, when you come up to a stop sign, you're gonna make a turn where your view is obstructed to where it's difficult to see?
We've enforced it on certain corners, yeah, where the site triangle is defined, but if we could have a clearer, more concise language to.
Perfect.
It doesn't have to be on a street corner either. It can actually be on a straight drive. We've seen where it was just way out in the street and blocking someone's view where they can't exit safely from their own driveway next door.
And that's gonna come up in chapter 94, where we have landscaping in the right of way, landscaping in the front setback, and that's an area that I'd really like to tighten up or define or figure out what we want done, because we have a lot of variation throughout the city and what most properties are not in line with what the code actually says.
Yeah, correct. There's going to be a lot more in 94 on this issue and a lot of other issues, I guess, as well.
Do you consider 94 to be the biggest?
I think so, yes.
Biggest challenge?
It will. Well, a lot, that's where the most issues will be, sure.
Is this the correct chapter for the vertical clearance of the roadway?
Oh, for limbs and things like that. I think I've noted that in 94, we did find some regulations worth considering, but we could cross-reference, probably a good idea to do cross-referencing if we're going to add things like that.
One second. Any comments on Mr. Riefler's thoughts? No, everybody good? Mr. Bean.
Remember, talked about the same issue. And some of the neighbors that I again, 1 second. Privacy would be affected. That's primarily the 3 homes at the end. They have good view when they pull out because it's privacy would be good for them. Most of them, the only thing you can see on those 3 homes driving with profit. Yes, it's a wide back expanse to the water. So it's something that look at. Change.
So if you're in a cul-de-sac, is what you're saying. If you're in a special, unique circumstance where you and your neighbor would be staring at each other, then it should have a different code.
Yep.
No, we won't call out any particular address, but we'll call out cul-de-sacs.
Yes, because we have that kind of exception for abutting up to public property or Gulf Boulevard Causeway.
Okay.
For the exceptions and rules.
All right, what else?
That's all we had on this chapter. If the council has anything they'd like to discuss.
Anyone? No? All right. Well, that takes care of those 4 chapters. Now we're up to general business. And I wanted to bring something up to see what the council thought about it. I've been discussing with Mr. Riefler what is the benefit of the 5-year look back period. And so far, I really haven't got any benefit. And I'm gonna let Mr. Reefler speak on that. I'm not recommending that we do away with a look back period, but see that Treasure Island has no look back period. It basically resets every time they complete a project. If you go to Indian Rocks Beach, they have a 1-year look back period. But if you go to Bel Air Beach, we have a 5-year look back period. This all started whenever a student surveyed us all. I don't know if everyone was surveyed, but I was. And I think
Oh, that, okay.
I think Kyle is actually meeting with the young man about this particular rule and why it exists and what's the benefit, what's the drawbacks of having it. Is it too long? Should it be shortened? Should it be done away with? What's the benefits with FEMA? Kyle?
So after you brought it up, I looked into our CRS credit and the points that we earn at our verification, which is every 5 years. And the verification, when they do that, is when they audit you for everything you're supposed to be doing for
Excuse me, what is a CRS?
a community rating system. It's through the National Flood Insurance Program. It's an incentive beyond the being part of the National Flood Insurance Program. So there's baseline rules that everyone has to follow. That's kind of the guidelines that Mr. Mora was bringing up, that are federal restrictions to be to participate, to be a community that residents can get national flood insurance, the subsidized program. So the community rating system is kind of like, it's a discount system built on top of it to tighten up, create incentive to have more restriction to benefit the overall program. So we are a class 6, which it's each tier, it goes all the way down to a class 1. If you were say a class 9, you would get 5% discount on flood insurance. Since we're class 6, each class gives you 5% more, so we get a 20% discount. So when they do that verification process, which is like a 5-year audit, if you're a class 6, they come through and they just check what you're doing. They give you the credit, the points, verify it that that you earned that class. So we did that in 2020. I went back and talked to our ISO, which is like a independent person that works for the state, and he pulled up our scoring, and I talked about this look back period, which is also known as cumulative substantial improvement. So substantial improvement goes all the way back to it's a main rule of being part of the National Flood Insurance Program. It's what people a lot of times call the FEMA 50% rule. That is, by FEMA guidance, it should be per year standard. So I don't know with the community that's doing it per project, if that's actually in what they're supposed to be doing, but it's per year or per event, if you're talking substantial damage. And so if you're part of the National Flood Insurance Program, if you have a property, regardless of how much the overall property is worth, taking into account the location and all that, what they do is they want to appraise the value of the actual structure, which is what you're insuring for flood insurance. That is done at a cost value with depreciation added in. So if you have a house that's built in like 1960, a lot of times they'll depreciate it by years of usable life. And you're doing an appraisal on what that actual structure is worth. But not if you were to rebuild it, like what it's actually worth, the materials and how much they degraded and everything. So they get that number, and that's the value of your structure. And then what the rule is that if you're going to do any improvements to that structure, you can't go, the value of that improvement can't be over 50% of what the value of the structure is. So the 5-year look back is instead of it being in 1 year's time, we have a 5-year look back saying within 5 years of that first improvement that you had it appraised, you can't go over 50% in 5 years as opposed to just 1 year.
It really restricts you.
Yeah, so the value of your home, they look at the value of your home from 5 years ago.
Yeah, I
And
understand.
that's, yeah, that starts the math. I'm still, I don't hear any benefit to having this rule. 1 versus 5. I don't understand it. And is there anything going to change that, what is the benefit? Because I'm gonna explain why I'm asking all these questions. There are a lot of old homes with good bones in this community. Obviously, there are some that live in lower lying areas like, I always lose my bearings here, but if you head south, they're in flood zone. And I'm sure that they would love to build up if they could. So leave the garage in the danger zone, declare your downstairs non-habitable and build up. And now you've got a better home. But instead, the solution for most people is turning into either sell out. So you lose a good neighbor, you lose still a nice home. It gets knocked down and you get a mansion back in its place. And then also with a mansion, I'm not going to say it's everyone, but we get a lot of part-timers that aren't really, it's not the old charm that this community was built around. And so what I'm looking at now is I'm thinking, well, why not give these homeowners a chance to actually stay in Bel Air Beach instead of forcing them to leave because there's no path to fix their home. Even if you look at the front of a lot of these older homes, I'm sure there's many homeowners who would love to just be able to put a new face on the front of their home, bring it up to a modern standard so that they look like a newer style home. But it's cost prohibitive because you have this 5-year lookup. So a great example is you buy a house, you move into Bel Air Beach, you buy a house, the prior owner or the flipper dumped many thousands of dollars into this home in a very short period of time. You move in thinking that you're going to do some things and you can't do squat to your home. So you're stuck with something that really you had a completely different vision for than what you've got. And so you either sell it or you live with it. And then you're probably not very happy with it. And so now you've got to wait 5 whole years for the clock to reset. And that's hoping that nothing breaks. Because if something breaks and it requires permitting, then the clock, it doesn't really reset, but you extend that time period out. The clock moves forward a little bit, but you're still looking at 5 years. And normal wear and tear and maintenance on a home, for some of these homes, they're not able to get it done. And unless there's a benefit, I'm not really sure why we're doing this to ourselves. Yes.
I agree with you completely, and I thank you for bringing that up because I've encountered the 50% rule on many occasions, and I think it really is a detriment to our community in the sense that people that do want to commit and live here can't make even some basic improvements. I mean, to refit to hurricane rated windows is a major expense. If you add in a new water heater and, oh, I got to do a roof repair in the meantime, we end up with more derelict properties that are just decaying as opposed to people having the ability to maintain their home.
There is an exception, so like if, say, your window is put out, you are allowed to be exempt from that 50% if you're bringing it up to code. So say your window broke and then you by requirement had to put in a hurricane window, you can't do your whole house. But you can fix what's broken.
You can do 25% a year, right? If you're gonna replace all the windows, I mean, without even getting a permit, you can. I think the county says 25%, you could, 25% means you can do per year.
But it still has to follow.
Yeah, because I did mine,
Yeah.
yeah.
But you weren't on the edge. So the example is, say someone did a whole bunch of remodeling, sold the house, and then you bought it and all of a sudden something breaks. You can repair it, like, but you can't do your whole roof if you get a leak in your roof. Which people want to do, they want to put a whole new roof on. But see, that's where you run into some issues.
Would the 5-year removal of the 5-year fix what he just said there?
It would certainly help because most people aren't doing half the value of their home in a single year.
Right.
That I'm sure there's projects that are going to happen. There is some disadvantage there. It's going to bring more traffic into to Kyle's office and to Aaron handles. Does Aaron handle the permitting right now or no?
No, I do.
Oh, you do it all. Okay.
Larry.
So it's definitely going to increase the number of permits that would be coming in. I realize that, but also we charge for permits. So there would be possibly increased revenue that could maybe make it to where we could afford additional help just for permitting.
About tax value.
Well, tax value it goes up every time you do a project.
Yeah, I'm saying, yeah.
And then if you really want it to go up, sell your house and then it just skyrockets.
Well, I just talked to Rich Scott's office last week about that NFIP with the discounts and everything like that. And it's still in litigation. There hasn't been any movement.
It's gonna be cool.
And it's a total mess. I mean, you look at 2.0, it tells you all these discounts you're supposed to get. And then you say to your underwriter, where are they? And I don't know if you heard my complaints about this during council meetings. No one can give you an answer. And that's why like 14 states are suing the NFIP, but it's a total mess.
When they changed the rating system, it really kind of threw everything out the window because
They took the grandfather.
they took the grandfathering out, so. Like you said, what's the benefit anymore? Because regardless, if you're gonna remodel your house, it's below the flood plain. You know, you're gonna pay a lot for insurance if you want to insure it, regardless what you put into it. So you're gonna be paying for it anyways.
Right.
You're not getting any benefit from. Before, the benefit sort of was like being a good steward of the system so that you weren't allowing people to put so much money below the floodplain and then screwing the whole system over, kind of. But I can see that they with the 2.0 and it changed. Everybody's coming up to full rating. And the real people that are saving now are the people who are built up because they're no longer paying for the people that aren't.
Right. Well, and there's a possibility that a lot of these, that I believe that this rule, changing this rule would actually bring some relief to the southern side of the bridge. That for people that really wanted to fix their home and solve the problem, that it's not really a huge deal when it enters your garage, but it's a giant deal whenever it enters your home in your living space.
Just coming over here, Dave, walking up the street, one neighbor was saying, are we gonna do anything about this flooding and all like that? Because I'm about ready to sell. I can't take it anymore, and he said, everything's been on the table. We're aggressively looking at, thankfully. And he says, well, it's a real burden.
Right. Well, and I also see that the image of Bel Air Beach, I can see it changing rapidly as people choose to sell out and move away because they see no path to fixing their home. They can't afford the mansion and they can't afford to fix their or I'm sorry, it's not that they can't afford to upgrade their home, but there's no pathway for them to do that. I think that this would help dramatically, and I believe that, overall, we would have more tax revenue, we would have happier residents. I believe that they would stick around longer instead of just cashing out and leaving. And I think overall, we'd have a more beautiful city.
Absolutely.
So what I would ask all of you to do is put some serious thought into it. This will come up in 94, right?
Yes.
And it's in, if you're looking for it, it's not even an ordinance, it's in definitions at the very beginning of the chapter. So read up on it, and all it is a word change, or 2 words. Instead of 5 years, it's 1 year would be the change, and that's it. It's fixed. And if it becomes problematic, well, we can cross that bridge when the time comes. But right now, I see no benefit whatsoever to what we're doing.
Great.
Yeah. I'd like to go back and kind of listen to or look at the minutes around surrounding when they actually adopted it, because I, to my knowledge, they never got credit, or the cities never got credit for that. So I don't know what the mindset was when they.
I asked, I
That got
said,
in
show
there.
me the city's credit to their underwriter, and they sent me to 3 different agencies. The last agency was some little island, no one could speak English. And that was the National Flood Review or something. It was a total joke.
It's tough to get a full understanding of risk rating 2.0. The one thing when I was at conference that they assured, because it comes up, where communities or representatives of communities are asking, why are we even doing the CRS program? Because you're looking at how, all these scales and like how, and they're like, are we even getting the discount? But they assure us that we'll be paying more without that discount. I don't know exactly how.
Well, yeah,
But they-
but that's what I'm saying.
Guarantee it, so I don't know.
Show to me in writing, like if you're underwriting the policy, it should say, here's their discount. And it doesn't. I'm 4 feet above flood level. Well, I should get another 20% there. Where's that at? Oh, it's in there. No, it's not in there, right?
Yep, it's an ongoing issue.
Yeah.
All right. Do we have any other comments in general business? Yes, sir.
Randy, I'm gonna try to get you a pay raise if you can pull a rabbit out of your hat here. It was good. It's under 94, but it's a tower issue. That,
I think
we're
we're
gonna
gonna
talk about that tonight, or do you?
we can do a quick conversation on it, but I don't want to stay here all night over it because we're going to be discussing it anyway. But I think there's nothing that can be done about the one that happened. However, I believe that language in our code would at least cause for anyone else that wants to do this, it would prevent them from putting it in the setback. And that's what happened because it's considered to be a utility. Is that right?
It's actually not in the setback at all. But what we determined is our definition of mechanical equipment. It would meet that definition if they encroach the setback up to 4 feet.
What is it?
It's a tower.
Amateur.
Antenna tower.
I've missed,
I'm sorry.
I've missed that.
Carl-
word, Sorry.
So it actually is not. He's out of his setback.
He's out of the setback.
And the wind rating and everything.
That's what the county assured me, that they met everything that was required. And I mean, it does look like they put them through, separate engineering for that.
I was just visualizing like every other house having one. That would really look good.
So it's not the same setback that we've designated for things like generators. It's actually
outside of that.
outside.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't think we have anything. I just don't. I don't see it.
Randy?
Everyone's looked at it.
I appreciate the inquiry and the question, for, in the event it wasn't clear. The question relative to the existing antenna on the property that's been the subject of discussion since I was hired in the summer of 2022. I would agree with the mayor's conclusion that what's done is done, in as much as that, what I told you, or this council, its composition varying over time. What I told this council was the violation that we prosecuted most directly was the absence of a permit. At the time, the property owner was representing himself, if you will, and saying, I don't need a permit, and if I applied, they deny me. And we say, well, you can't presume that. You have to give us the opportunity to review it, give us a fair shake, and we'll give you one. And the gentleman subsequently secured legal counsel. I learned admittedly new things about that area of the law that I was not specifically familiar with. And we said, and my advice to this city was that antenna had to go through permitting review. We could not just say they're banned. We had to determine if it could be accommodated and if anything in our code specifically prevented it. During the city's portion of the permitting review, Manager Riefler and I conducted a detailed review of our code. It did not fall within the setback. It did not meet definitions for other elements that may have imposed restrictions. And then ultimately it was submitted for permitting review, and our request to, in turning it over to the county, we said, we do not wish to prejudice your analysis. However, our specific concerns relative to this structure are its height, its wind sustainability, and similar safety concerns that we would impose on any other structure in our community. So as you perform your independent autonomous duties as our building official, please ensure that you review these elements. They were reviewed, as Manager Riefler has indicated. It was subject to specific additional engineering supplementation that may not ordinarily be required. The property owner complied by providing it. And in conducting that review, whether it be with guide wires or anything else, and I'm not suggesting there are any, I don't know the particulars because as your city attorney, I don't get involved in permitting. But I will tell you that it passed permitting and the structure is being erected or raised and lowered as the permitting allows. If it is not consistent with permitting, then that is an entry point for the city. Now, that said, as it relates to that, what I would call settled matter, and again, remember there's federal preemptions and state preemptions on what we can do relative to these structures. And just even as we talk about going forward, imposing setback limitations, I would suggest to you that there's some case law saying, just saying it's in our setback is not enough. Can you accommodate it? Can you give it a variance to say, okay, they're proposing to go, you have a restriction of 10 feet. They're proposing to go 2 feet into that. Is that such an imposition on the community that it cannot be tolerated? Or is it, hey, I'm trying to put it in, normally you say they can only be in the rear of my property. I'm trying to go in the side rear because there's a giant oak tree that I'm not allowed to remove. You will have to go through a case-by-case analysis regardless.
Right.
So the point is absolutely right that I think I personally, as your city attorney, would advise you as to that property. That's a settled matter.
Right.
I do agree with you as well that we should review our code with the assistance of the planner and my legal review to see, are there things we can do better? Making sure that it falls within the definition of whether it's electrical engineering or some other definition that we provide for an antenna shall not be within X feet, so, but may secure a variance subject to ABC criteria. Those are all options we may have.
Yeah.
And so bottom line is, you're saying, not to interrupt you, Mayor, but this is grandfathered,
I'm not saying it's grandfathered because what a grandfather provision suggests is something that is a nonconformity prior to the adoption of the code. I'm saying that what has been erected is consistent with your code. To the extent it is inconsistent with your code, it is inconsistent with provisions we are unable to enforce owing to preemptions and otherwise. So I'm not suggesting it's grandfathered. I'm actually saying it's in compliance. It's gone through permitting and there's nothing for us to do relative to that structure. However, we have the ability to amend our code to be proactive about future situations, see what lessons learned through this process and what legal issues did we identify, or planning issues, because that's kind of a Venn diagram of its own, did we identify that we may be able to resolve in the here and now?
Such as maybe you must hire a professional company. You must have an engineer who is willing to
And
design and
what
sign
those
off.
engineer design guidelines must include. Must they include wind rating specifications? Must they include
Yes.
whatever those criteria A through Z or 1 through 100 are? And I'm not suggesting we get into 100 criteria, but specifying what it is we're looking for. There was a lot of having to retroactively figure out what, both for the property owner and for the city,
Right.
what is it exactly? When
when his legal counsel came to us and said, I'm prepared to work with you and work with your code, show me what applies.
Mhm.
It's a question that had not been asked yet. And so that's something that we can make sure there's a clearer roadmap where this to come up in the future.
And just giving a different point of view than what we've all heard and we've thought about during this event. Very surprisingly, the gentleman actually did go to great lengths to have a safe tower, as much as it looks awful to the neighbors and it looks scary. I think that he went through every possible scenario to make sure that it was as safe as could possibly be erected.
And I wish to say, as again, the, issue spotter, naysayer, bad guy often, that my legal analysis is given with all sympathy to neighboring property owners. I'm not suggesting that it is now must be desirable to them. Just as much as they have private property rights, so too does the individual who erected this. They are compliant with our code. And at every point, I've always said, if a neighbor has property rights concerns, they may wish to avail themselves of their own rights. There's also, that's a broader discussion we need to have as we talk about some of these land development regulations on what is the role of government versus what is my role if I want to, whether it's sue my neighbor or work with my neighbor or find a solution with my neighbor. That doesn't necessarily mean that local government needs to be a part of that process.
Right.
Some of the concerns raised in the discourse recently concern, for example, the insurance rating for that property owner and the neighboring property owner. The city has no role in insurance relative to private property owners' insurance. So I don't know what that is, but even if it was a problem, it's not the city's problem to resolve. So, I say that with sympathy to all parties involved. Unfortunately, my job as advising this city is, one, to help you manage your risk, but two, to often find an imperfect solution. By definition, it's still a solution, but it's going to leave people unsatisfied. And there was no perfect solution that perfectly reconciled that gentleman's private property rights with the desire to say, I don't wish to see this, have this near me, or otherwise. I wish I could offer a solution that resolved all those. If I did, I would probably not be in meetings at 9 o'clock at night. So.
And I jumped over and I apologize for the past, doing that because, this is a learning job. And I apologize, like I said to you, but I think this is an FCC right, and like you just said, a private property right, and it probably the private property right is even more.
It's a sacrosanct value in our American system, in our state.
The thing is, I'm not gonna do this. Can I go erect that? Can I go and erect a tower tomorrow just like he did in my yard? And
Presently, yes.
and it would look like hell. This city would look like hell, in my view. All right.
Mr. Rob.
I think the terminology that Frank used earlier regarding the grandfather term, if we go in and change the code, and so now we have a more strict defined code system in our ordinance, and Bill Smith goes and builds something, and they say, well, gosh, that other tower didn't meet anything because they are grandfathered in based on the previous code.
That's what I was implying.
That would be the distinction. They'd be grandfathered on.
Right.
I have to tell you that if he goes, no matter what we do to our code, if the new antenna goes through the same process,
It passes
it passes.
based
The
on.
county will sign off on it.
That's right.
Because they deem it as safe. They deem it as not a threat. And
We can't create an ordinance, and I don't want to get into this, that something can't be.
I think
more
we
than
can,
10
we can be
feet
more
above your
strict,
roof.
right?
You know what I'm
The county?
saying?
well, the loophole that they see a tower, and really the antenna, the thing that's at the top of the
Right.
tower, is useless without the tower.
Yeah.
So it's effectively the antenna,
Right.
the whole structure.
The case law treats them as a single structure.
What I'm saying.
But can we make it, we cannot have what I can tell you is we can set general height limitations, but they cannot be absolute. Given the preemptions, we would still have to
Just answer
consider
my question.
accommodations and say, like,
if somebody came to us and said, for instance, and I'm going to use all this terminology wrong, I have a UHF signal, and in order to get my UHF signal around the surrounding bridge and trees, I need to be at 42 feet. You have 27 feet as your restriction, arbitrary numbers. We may have to well consider that 42-foot request, provided it can be done in a manner that otherwise satisfies life, health, safety requirements. If they can do that, we may have to pursuant to federal and state preemption, say, yes, no other structure in this town could be, in the city could be that high. However, because of federal preemptions, we have to at least give it consideration. And if we can find good reason to not give that variance or say, or establish, they're asking for 42, but we have our own study that says they could do it at 36. But then we're still having a fight about going over that absolute.
Right, really the saving grace of going much higher than what we are right now is the fact that you get so high and now it requires wires going to the ground to keep it upright. And it's permanent. You can't take it down during a storm. So I'd say that what he did was the best case scenario where their safety concerns are taken into consideration and still he's able to successfully operate his ham radio. And really it's the very best scenario that legally we have is what he did. Yes.
I just have one question and then one new topic, if I may. And that is, question is, has anybody shared with the complaining neighbors the information that we now?
Yes.
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 It's multiple times.
Right away.
Yeah.
I figured that was the case.
It wasn't well received. I didn't well receive it, okay?
Yeah. I figured that was the case, but I just wanted to be sure because
Yeah.
they
And then-
they want to have
and
that
then Mayor
information.
reached out to him and everything and,
Very nice. Thank you. New topic, if I may.
Sure.
I understand and was very pleased to hear that we have a new application for board, council member.
Oh, I was going to bring that up. Do you
Okay.
mind if I take this? Mr. Reefer, we currently have 3 applicants. Is that right? We have 2. So one of them did not. I thought we had a
He
third.
was going to, and he did not.
Changed his mind. Okay. So I asked Renee to accept applications until the election because I wanted to know how many we were actually going to need to fill the spots. And so if we needed 3, well, then we take whatever we've got. But if we only need 1, the last thing that I wanted to do was bring 3 people in and then have to go through this process again after the election. What I would like this council to do is after the election is over, now we know what the criteria is. I would like to bring all the candidates in a small work session like this where we just interview them, but we don't vote. Okay. We meet with them all, we ask them all the questions that we want to, and then we go home and then we come back at the following council meeting and we elect our new council member or members, depending upon how the election goes. If the council is good with that.
The April council meeting.
Yes. If the council is good with that, well, it would have to be very quick because the election is the 19th. So you would have to bring them in within a week and vote them in. I don't know what day the April. That's a quick turnaround. We could do a special.
You're gonna have a special meeting anyway to re-swear her and I in. Right?
You're in. There's no election for you.
Yeah, I understand it, but you still have to re-swear.
I'll swear you back in. Yes. Yeah.
So
It doesn't require a special meeting. We've done this in regular meetings.
No, that's very logical because it wouldn't.
I'm sorry?
The April meeting will be April 1st.
Yeah, April.
April Fool's Day.
You thought you were in.
That's not a lot of time to look at the candidate. That's a very short period to jam in. Okay, the election's over. Let's have a special meeting. And now let's elect a member. I think we're okay. Why don't we have a special meeting after the April meeting?
Why would we have to have a special meeting? So if we have the election, and let's just assuming it says, okay, 5. So we only need 1. So then at the April 1st council meeting, that's when we would vote them.
I want to have time for us to have sort of an informal interview process where we speak to each one of them. And then also give the council time to actually, if you want to call them up and ask them questions.
Sure.
I think that we should do our due diligence and make sure that, that whoever the 5th or the 5th, 6th and 7th members are, that we get the very best. Hopefully we'll have more come in, but even with 2, if it turns out to be a 5-member council,
Right.
I want to make sure we get the best. So if everybody's good with that, that's what I would like to do.
Yeah.
And then I guess maybe we'll figure out after the April 1st, what day is a good day. We can maybe by the time we have our work session, maybe we can have the special meeting just before it, bring them in and vote. And then now we've got our council member or members, and then we go right into a work session. Everybody good with that? Yeah, okay. And anything else? Because I'm ready to go home.
Me too.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Do I have a second? All right, all in favor? Aye. All right, let's go home, everyone.